Welcome back, data enthusiasts. Today's conversation is with Carmen Sitz, co-founder and data leader of Edyfi. Edyfi are the Berlin-based company that's revolutionizing the real estate industry. Everything related to energy efficiency and costing decisions. They provide real-time, location-specific, predictive analytics for buildings, particularly in the retail domain. So we talked about how all this data captured within buildings, if it's made transparent, could actually transform the entire building management industry. That's your smart meters, IoT sensors, cameras, VP panels, and much more. We talked about the data transparency challenges, particularly where landlords and tenants' data, it's not shared and it's heavily regulated, and it's often with a lot of distrust for one another. But the new age of data transparency, hopefully this will help us all and the environment to live way more sustainably. And that's what Carmen and Edyfi are doing. It was a great conversation, very enthusiastic, and certainly data for good. So enjoy the pod. Today, we are talking about data transparency in the sustainable real estate domain. So quite a niche domain, but data transparency relates to all commercial areas, if you will. So Carmen, can you start by putting this in your context? Give us a bit about your background and your current role at Edyfi.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to start? So I'm originally from the US, and I moved to Germany about 7 years ago to do my master's. So my background was influenced a lot by the international perspective, moving to Germany. I studied technology management as well as leadership, and I've always been kind of a data nerd, if you will. That was always something that I always had in the background. I was teaching data analytics, even in the United States, and working in retail and the energy industry throughout my studies. And then after I finished my master's degree, I started at the Recruitment Group, which is very complicated to clarify for anyone, but basically the Recruitment Group invests in real estate. Our investors are in Ireland. Our real estate assets are based in Germany. And it's basically a group of various startups that do different jobs throughout the real estate supply chain, if you will. So everything from fund management on our Irish end to property management on the German side. We have companies in Ireland, in Germany, in Poland, and in France, and now also in India. And yeah, we do everything from building our own internal software with our company in India, TechMash, to our own internal marketing through the company that I started with in the Recruitment Group, Yes, and we property management with our sister company G-Form. So we do everything kind of on our own, and that's always kind of been part of the Recruitment Group strategy to, if we can do it ourselves with a little bit of elbow grease, we're going to do it. And that's kind of where Edyfi came from. In 2023, I believe, the Recruitment Open Fund, which is our largest real estate fund, became an Article 9 registered fund under EU law, which means basically that we have certain requirements that we fulfill on a sustainability perspective for the EU, and we have to prove that those that we are fulfilling those things each year. And so that's where Edyfi kind of began to evolve. It started off as a project that I took on during my second year at Yes, and it evolved now into a full-blown company where I was basically pulling together the data on carbon emissions for our buildings as well as energy consumption of our tenants, and putting that into larger data models and visualizing that and forecasting that out until 2050. And through all of the work that I did in this project, I saw a ton of business potential for the rest of the real estate industry. With Agreement Open, the fund is the largest Article 9 LTIF in the EU, which basically means that it's the largest sustainable investment fund in Europe. And because of that, we kind of became an example for other investment funds. We've seen trends in real estate that investors are looking for more and more sustainable investment. And this is something that the Agreement Group really prioritized the strategy, and they needed somebody to have the data or put together the data to do it for them. And that's where I kind of answered that call. I always joke that the group CEO, Johnny Bolin, told me to start looking into carbon accounting and automating buildings and things like that. But it was something that I've always been interested in, and it came at the perfect time that Edyfi came to be for the group. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for giving me that overview. I can
Yeah.
see how your passion in analytics comes through in your teaching and now comes through in your work. I can see how you latched onto the real estate world, and then obviously sustainability in the real estate world has become a center point and not just lip service, given the regulations that have followed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've told us about Agreement Group. Let's focus in on Edyfi. What's the problem that Edyfi is solving in the real estate and sustainability world with data and AI, particularly your passion areas?
Yeah. So if you look at real estate is very much a laggard in terms of technology. So think of it as an industry that is data rich but insights poor. There's a lot of data that comes from a building on a daily basis, but that building is still a black box in a lot of ways, not only for the landlord, but also for the tenant. And there's a lot of stakeholders that need information from this black box in order to make more informed decisions, in order to reduce costs, in order to create new revenue streams. And what Edyfi is basically doing is we're going into these buildings and we're installing IoT type devices, so sensors, cameras, so on and so forth. And we're automating these small building actions. So whether that be that we're getting every 5 minutes a reading from the smart meter that's installed in the building, or we are tracking customer footfalls throughout the building, heat mapping to see where customers are traveling, to understand market catchment, et cetera. We're basically trying to shine light into this black box and provide that energy back to the landlord and the tenant. The biggest issue with this data, and the reason why it's not transparent, is because the landlord has a little bit of information and the tenant has a little information, and they don't share it with each other. So there's no full picture of what's happening inside of the black box. And these data silos that are created through that is what Edyfi was kind of formed to do, to kind of mediate the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, or the Agreement Group mediates the relationship with the tenant, and Edyfi provides consulting and support for this relationship, as well as the data architecture.
Interesting. So the black boxes that exist in everywhere we reside, I see there's great commercial potential as well
Absolutely.
as sustainability potential.
Exactly.
And you highlight the silos that exist between these different stakeholder groups, and potentially Edyfi could change this through data transparency and connecting those stakeholders. What do you think the impact is, or what's the end state of the kind of relationship between those stakeholders, the landlords, the tenants, the leaseholders?
Absolutely. So I think that for me, it's also kind of sustainability is also kind of a passion project for me. Like, I grew up in the country. Nature's always been something that's been really impactful for me. And so in my ideal world, which the real estate industry might not necessarily agree with all of the time, is that we have the democratization of data, which basically means data that all parties have access to, that is protected, that is safe, that measures up to GDPR, and that everybody has access in order to make decisions that are profitable from a sustainability standpoint, and then hopefully also the financial side, because that will always be important to businesses. And that's kind of the idea of it. And what we seek to do at Edyfi is kind of mediate this relationship. So how do we provide both parties, the landlord and the tenant, access to their data in a way that feels like they're not giving up some form of control, that protects both parties? You could call it a data prenup, if you will. So just like you would get a prenup going into a marriage to protect yourself and your partner, we take away the negative connotations that might come with that. What we see it as is really having two parties sit down and agree upon, one, their sustainability goals and their strategy, as well as their data transparency goals and strategy. And that's really how I see it working in the long run, being able to provide this access and democratize this data in a way that feels safe for both of these parties that don't want to give up control of their data.
Okay, super. What are the benefits for those parties then? The landlords and the leaseholders. It might sound obvious, but just kind of bullet them. Because you need to get their buy-in, right? And if I'm renting an apartment for 1 year, then I might, as we tend to be in Europe about our data being private and ours, we might be somewhat reluctant. So what's the benefit?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So the primary properties that I work in right now are grocery retail properties. So imagine like the shopping center that you go to around the corner. The Agreement Group might own that shopping center, and within that shopping center there is various kinds of retailers, from your classic grocery retailers like the full assortment, to discounters. There's maybe some various other retailers for near food or non-food type retail, clothing, etc. And the mall area is then something that owns the Agreement Group. So basically what you have here is a rental contract where there's various stakeholders, so various people leasing various sales areas within this large center. And then there's also a common area, so the mall area, for example. And this is something that's controlled primarily by the landlord in a lot of cases. So what the landlord has is the data for the mall areas. So we know how many people are coming in, how long they're spending in the food court, how much time they're spending parking in the parking lot, what the building's total usage is, but they have no clarity into the operations of tenants. So that's something that's protected without express consent in Germany. The landlord does not have access to tenant data. And that's really important because for a landlord, in order to be able to report on the performance of a building, they need to understand how their tenant is performing, or how the energy that the tenant is using is performing in this case. And in a lot of cases, especially in this analogy, the landlord isn't the one that signs the energy contract. So they don't know if the energy that the tenant is using is green, things of that nature. Now, rental contracts on this scale are extremely complicated, but basically what you'll see is the landlord needs access to the tenant's data, and then on the other hand, the tenant has no idea what's happening in this building as a total. They don't know what kind of customers are coming in, how long they're staying, how long they're driving to get to the property. They don't typically even know what their own energy consumption is, or they don't use it or utilize it on the level that they need to. And both of these parties have regulations that they have to live up to on a sustainability perspective. So for the Agreement Group in this case, it's SFDR. For the tenants and grocery retailers, they're things such as they have to have a smart meter installed by 2027, as one example, and then various other regulations that they need to report not only to their stakeholders, their board of directors, but also to the EU as well. And without a full picture, neither of these parties can really fulfill what they need to from a reporting standpoint, and also just from a cost-saving productivity standpoint. A tenant doesn't know what they're consuming every 5 minutes. They don't have systems that are shutting on and off by themselves. Typically, it's a temperature gauge that's right on the checkout, and it has to be at a certain temperature. But if things fluctuate, it's not easy to control, and it doesn't think for itself. And that's where we would then come in and offer that support.
Fantastic, really interesting, massive power and cost-saving implications. I
Absolutely.
kind of view it as maybe the landlords having the data for the X and Y paradigm. Landlords having X and tenants having Y, and
Yeah,
if they only knew each other's data, they could chart the graph, but without that, they're to some extent blind. Really,
exactly.
really powerful. Have you can you give us any use cases, like in the retail domain, where a company's changed what they're doing off of the back of realizing the other stakeholders groups' data and
Yeah,
using that?
absolutely. So I think the most impact that we've been able to make so far is on the landlord side, like within the agreement group. There's one specific case that I would love to talk about because this was super interesting to me, and it kind of gives you a perspective of what position the real estate industry is in as of now. So when we built a model that forecasts the carbon emissions of specific buildings until 2050. Now, this model was made to fulfill our SFDR requirements to the EU, but it was also something that we use as a tool to better understand our portfolio and the properties that we have. Within the agreement group, we have a buy and hold strategy. So we want to have this, we have a relationship with the tenant that we want to last for 15 years. So we want a retailer to come in and be so satisfied with the area that they're at, that they stay there for 15 years. And what we basically needed to show is for the time of the lease, what would the carbon impact be on the portfolio, and what does that trend look like? Because until 2050, Germany has made the commitment to be at net zero emissions, and retailers, fund managers, portfolio managers, like we all have a role to play in that. And we were able to forecast out until 2050 what the carbon emissions would be for specific properties. And based on that, we could go into situations where we were negotiating rental contracts or planning renovations, which buildings needed more attention than others in the next however many years, and how do we properly budget plan in order for that to happen. And based on this tool, which I kind of call a carbon simulator, we were then able to go to the bank. So the bank is the one that provides money to us, to the property manager here in Germany, in order to go and purchase a property. And the bank was like, we have concerns about the levels of risk from a carbon perspective, from an ESG perspective, that buying a shopping center like this, what are the implications of that? And through this carbon simulation, we were able to show that, yeah, it's an older building, but based on the legacy carbon that is already in the building, as well as the renovation repairs that need to go in it, with that, even if we were to knock this building down and rebuild this building, it would still be so many more carbon emissions that it wouldn't be worth it. So it is worth the investment with the embedded carbon, with the renovation plan that we have mapped out to be at net zero by 2050. To really show, one, this buy and hold strategy. We want these developments to be something that lasts. We want to retrofit properties in the most energy efficient way and the most carbon neutral way we can. And with this, we were able to show the bank that, yeah, this looks like carbon risky from like the initial perspective. But if you really drill into the data and you take this time to drill into the model, you can see that this isn't something where you just tear down and start new. This is something where you really plan strategically over the next 30 years to get to where you want to be. And that was the first time that the ESG analysts at this bank had been shown something like this, such an in-depth analysis for a property specifically. And they were really impressed by it. And I think that was probably the first initial big impact that I was able to make with this data. And it was super rewarding to see that it is possible in a lot of ways when it looks so impossible just a few minutes. So yeah.
I imagine Germany has a long way to go with carbon footprint reductions and
Absolutely.
retrofitting buildings. I've not seen many that have IoT sensors or cameras in. Maybe I wouldn't see
No.
them ordinarily. Is there a country around Europe that's doing a great job already, and they're harnessing the great power of data for surefire sustainability improvements?
So I think I don't know if it's country specific necessarily. I think it's a lot more industry specific, I would say. I think that it depends. It really depends on what industry you're in. If you look at the automotive industry, for example, IoT, the whole entire supply chain manufacturing system, digital twins, like they've got everything down to its brass tacks, especially here in Germany. If you look at BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, like these are industries that are really advanced. So I wouldn't say that it could be, you could define it as country specific in this case. If you look at real estate, even breaking it down into its increments in real estate, I would say that maybe residential is even more advanced than, like, retail will always be behind when it comes to technology. But if you look at those niches, that's where you can really break it down into is it ready for the future? Is it not ready for the future? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to take our favorite laggard, which is the grocery retail real estate bubble, and we're trying to get it to kind of meet that next step. And it takes a lot of time and effort and work and conversations and culture change and whatnot to kind of get retailers as well as asset managers on the same page about this. But like the story that I just mentioned, talking to the specific bank, it's becoming a priority for investors to be able to show this data. And it's a priority for the EU. We're a legal thing that we have to do. So it's time that we kind of take that next step, regardless of what the government says, in the United States, especially in my own home country. This is something that, regardless of what kind of regulations are passed, it's still a priority for people for the future. What are you going to do if it's 5 degrees hotter when you go grocery shopping and your building isn't ready to handle that? We're looking at outages like we saw in Spain the last couple of weeks because of inefficient grid management. Like, this is something that you can't just forget about because there's real life implications for it in the future. So, yeah.
It sounds like we've got a long way to go. And of course, some industries are doing way better than others. As a data and AI leadership professional, what do you view as the biggest organizational or technical, the biggest challenges that lie ahead for you in embarking upon this journey?
So
that was a deep breath.
Yeah. I would say one massive one that like is front of mind for me right now, because it's something that I've been dealing with very regularly. Bureaucratical hurdles in Germany is a huge one. For smart meter rollout in Germany, the amount of bureaucratical hurdles that you have to jump through to get a smart meter installed is crazy. It doesn't matter if you're willing to pay for it. It takes ages. It's the same for installing EV hyperchargers at supermarkets. It's the same for installing PV panels on the roofs. There are so many bureaucratic hurdles in order to get this technology into buildings. And then if we take it back to the data side of things, the biggest hurdle is the lack of transparency. It is the unwillingness from a culture perspective to share data. And that's really what we're trying to get moving again, to show that this is something that is necessary for the future and it's something that benefits both parties. And I've talked about the cost savings already. But how do we really make an impact when we don't know what we're trying to impact? If we don't have a picture of what we're trying to do, then it's not worth starting to sketch up plans for the next 15 years of this rental contract, because we have no idea where we're going to end up. So I think the two biggest ones are going to be the bureaucratical hurdles that we face, and then the lack of transparency and the need to be more transparent with data and to really share that data, because the only way that we're going to get to net zero is if we do it together. It can't just be other people like me banging on doors. It's something that you really have to have buy-in from all of your stakeholders.
Massive challenges ahead. I think of the Data for Good podcast being for the data community, and I wonder what data people could do to contribute to this sector, if anything at all. Are there areas of sustainability that data people could start researching and innovating in that perhaps you would like to and are not doing so yet? What
Yeah,
can data people do to contribute to this great challenge and necessary one?
absolutely. So I think that in terms of I'll give you two. So the first one, um, we need more data literacy in real estate. So we need people that understand data and see the importance of data and sustainability to start hunting for positions in real estate, because things are changing and it's not always the first priority of an organization to hire a data engineer. That's just the reality of it.
Yes.
So that needs to be something that changes. So if this is a career that you're interested in, then start looking for companies that have similar mindsets as you. So that's what I did when I left college. The Agreement Group was already very focused on sustainability, diversity, different initiatives that were important to me. So join a company like this, and once you have your foot in the door, you can create your own career trajectory from that. All you need is that initial step in the door, and then you can kind of map out your future. When I started, as a junior analyst, I had not planned that I would be a CEO 2.5 years later. This was something that was very crazy for me to experience, especially in the startup bubble. Things move fast, but this was even faster than I had expected. But if you come in and you have ideas and you have goals, and sustainability, data, whatever that is, even if it's like you just really want to goof around with neural networks, whatever that might be, find a use case for it and really market yourself in a way that positions you as thinking future oriented, et cetera, because that would be really important. I would say from a research perspective, the area that needs a lot of research, from my point of view, if we look into AI, what we see is a lot of concerns regarding energy consumption. And there's various ways to train AI to make it more intelligent, to update various parts of the model, to train various parts of a model at different times and different ways in order to save energy. But I have been looking into this area of research that is truly fascinating for me from a sustainability perspective and also a data perspective. It's two researchers from Hawaii that are doing research on plant genomes. And how a plant genome, the DNA of a plant, can be used as a data storage center. So what we're looking at now, yeah, fascinating, right? Like this is such, this has nothing to do with the Agreement Group either, or with Edyfi, but this is just something that I find that's truly fascinating. Imagine that instead of putting in data centers that consume hundreds, thousands of megawatt hours of energy a year, imagine instead you're just increasing the biodiversity of your backyard. Or you have a vertical farm in Berlin, like what we have within the Agreement Group, that acts as a data center where we're using a plant's genome to store our data. That for me would be something that would be completely mind-boggling. And I think that's the kind of impact that we can look for in the future to make a real difference. Now, it could be something that is maybe still a fantasy right now, but back in the day, they also never expected to be flying down the Autobahn at 250 kilometers per hour. So I think that that's kind of an emerging area of research that's really fascinating. How can we help save the planet, reduce heat, the consumption of like heat loss, cooling, etc.? How can we do all of that to provide really efficient data that's also truly sustainable? That is an area of research that's super fascinating to me. So if there's anybody out there that's researching it, reach out to me and let's talk about it, because I am really interested in that area.
Fantastic. And you're right, it's an area of innovation that's perhaps beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah.
And yet so crucial for our existence. Where do you see AI and automation and smart buildings evolving to in the not so distant future?
Yeah.
You talked about smart meters and how difficult it is to get them into German, existing buildings.
Yeah.
Sensors, cameras. Where are we beyond the hype, beyond the great imaginations? Where are we going to in the next 5 to 10 years with AI and automation in smart buildings?
Yeah. So I would say right now we're kind of at the very beginning stages of smart buildings. Lights that turn on and off themselves, cooling systems that turn on and off themselves, HVAC systems that do the same. What I see kind of in the future is a building that is truly a circular economy. So think of it as a building that has PV panels on the roofs that's creating energy for itself. It's being able to utilize or store this energy in surplus times um, in order to efficiently run a building. So from an energy perspective, a building that runs itself. And then think of a smart building in the sense of you're installing a brain in a building. So all of the work that asset managers do to ensure that fire alarms are kept up to date, cooling systems are running efficiently, carbon capture is installed on the roofs, things of this nature, installing a heat pump. Imagine that an AI is making these decisions for the building itself. So instead of the asset manager having to ask the tenant for the yearly energy consumption of the building, that's already known and processed. And the way that energy consumption looks is very variable. So imagine that based on the weather patterns and how much battery is stored from the PVs, how efficiently that building can run from a green perspective, or how do we recycle water waste from these buildings. So really creating that circular economy in a building and then using data to do that. So creating the most efficient version of a building, and then also ensuring that it's kind of how Native Americans always say, like, you only take what you need, that building is only taking what it needs to run, and what it doesn't need, it leaves or it reuses in that case. So I see that as being the next big future project. And within the Agreement Group ourselves, we're working on similar projects. At Edyfi, am working on various projects on how we can make this data connect to this data. How can we install these IoT devices without having to deal with the bureaucratic hurdles? How do we ensure that this happens based on our relationships that we have with our tenants, and really launching some of these IoT type projects. So the same way that a car manufacturer in Germany might know what's happening in that car at every moment, I want to install that same thing for a grocery store in Germany, basically.
Exciting times, very exciting times. Carmen, we have reached the end of our time, and you've given us a snapshot into things that are coming. Could you tell us where people could find out more about the work that you're doing? Where can we get in contact with you? And also, what's coming next from Edyfi, if you're able to give us, what's the word? Give us a look underneath the kimono.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Carmen Sitz. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also find me via edyfi.com. Easy. We got the name up here, Edyfi, often confused with Edify, but we're different. So the Y comes first. Our website, find me on LinkedIn. Edyfi is also on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you. I live in Berlin, so if it's something that's interesting to you and you think you have an interesting idea, let's grab a coffee. For the future of Edyfi, I will be at GRI this September. That is for certain. So to my real estate people, if you will also be there, feel free to give me a call and set up a meeting. Over this summer, we're going to be rolling out a ton of new projects at different assets within Germany to see how we can better create transparency within this black box that I talked about. I don't want to give away too much yet, but we're definitely going to see some deep learning algorithms getting to work, analyzing some cool stuff. So yeah, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. Check out our website. We have a market report on the grocery retail industry up right now. Feel free to go and download it. It's super interesting. It gives you insights into 11 different European countries and the grocery real estate markets there. So who are the key grocers? What does a rental contract look like in these countries? What does the carbon footprint look like of these retailers? And what is the relationship between the rental contract or the landlord and the tenant look like in terms of benefits and cost? So if that's something that's interesting to you, go check out the report. You just got to give me a little bit of your information, and then it's for free. And otherwise, yeah. Find me on LinkedIn.
That's amazing. And it's truly data for good in every sense. And I can tell that you're really impassioned about it and you're making things happen as opposed to just talking about it, despite rubbing up against bureaucracy as you will invariably do in Germany. But yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Thanks for joining us today and see you next time.
Thank you, Joe. Have a good one.